What if the dirtiest war of the 19th century wasn't won with bullets, but in bedrooms? How could a single woman, with no right to vote, own property, or even have a voice, bring the most powerful men in a nation to their knees? She didn't fight them on their battlefield. In a world ruled by men with guns, her weapon was far more intimate, an army of male prostitutes. But how do you recruit such an army? And more importantly, how do you command their loyalty when the secrets they gather are worth more than gold? To understand this story, we must journey into the damp alleyways and smoke-filled parlors of late 19th century New Orleans, a city of music, magic, and above all, secrets. It is here we find a legend, a whisper on the lips of politicians and criminals alike. They called her Madame Evangeline. To the elite, it was just the name of a discreet tailor shop run by a widow with a shadowed past. But to those who truly mattered, it was the name of the most dangerous woman in America. Evangeline didn't build her empire with fabric and thread. She built it on human weakness. But who was she? She wasn't born into power. On the contrary, she was its victim. Years earlier, Evangeline was the wife of a brilliant inventor, a man destroyed by a cartel of corrupt businessmen who stole his patent, driving him to bankruptcy and suicide. Robbed of power and justice, she saw the system from the inside. She learned a brutal lesson. The law served the men who wrote it, and truth was merely a commodity. It was at her lowest point that she had an epiphany. The men who destroyed her world all had a common flaw: their appetites, their unspeakable desires. They could lock their money in safes and their families in mansions, but they could not guard their own secrets. And that was where she would strike. Her first soldier wasn't bought, he was saved. A young street artist, about to be imprisoned for a crime he was framed for by a judge who coveted his family's land. Evangeline intervened. She didn't offer him money, but a purpose, a chance at revenge. She trained him, taught him how to listen, how to entice, how to become a confidant. Within weeks, the young man not only secured the judge's confession, etched into his memory, but also uncovered a much larger bribery scheme. With this information, Evangeline not only freed the boy, but forced the judge to resign, installing a man who owed her a favor in his place. The first piece on her chessboard had been moved. The army of Nighthawks was born. Evangeline's method was both genius and perverse. She recruited charming, intelligent young men, most of them marginalized by society. Orphans, artists, immigrants, men who were invisible to the elite. She gave them a home, an education, and above all, a cause. They weren't mere spies. They were trained in psychology, body language, memory techniques, and even accounting to understand the ledgers their targets might leave open. Each hawk had a specialty. There were those for the politicians, others for the bankers, others for the judges. They didn't just sell pleasure, they sold the fantasy of being understood, of true companionship. And in the quiet moments after pleasure, the most powerful men in the city would confess their fears, their crimes, and their plans. But how did Evangeline ensure the information was true? What if one of her hawks fell in love, or was bought by the enemy? Loyalty was her obsession. The first rule of the Nighthawks was that they could never lie to her. Every piece of intelligence was cross-referenced with at least 2 other sources, often from hawks moving in different social circles. Betrayal was unthinkable, because Evangeline knew as much about her own men as she did her enemies. She was their protector, but also their potential executioner. Her empire of whispers ran flawlessly for nearly a decade. She brought down cartels, thwarted political assassinations, and secretly funded orphanages and hospitals with the money she extorted from the corrupt. She was an invisible hand of justice. But when you manipulate power for that long, power begins to look back. The threat arrived in the form of Senator Thomas Davenport, a man with a spotless public image and a ravenous presidential ambition. Davenport was no fool. He sensed an unknown intelligence operating in his city, a force that seemed to anticipate his every move. Secret deals would leak, political allies would fall to scandals that appeared from nowhere. He didn't know what or who he was looking for, but he launched a moral crusade, using the police to crack down on the city's underbelly, secretly hoping to suffocate the very source of the intelligence that threatened him. Evangeline's network was under siege. The situation reached a crisis point when Evangeline's best hawk, a man named Julian, who had infiltrated Davenport's innermost circle, vanished. Had he been discovered? Or worse, had he been turned? For the first time, the Shadow Queen was blind. Her enemies were closing in, and her most valuable weapon was compromised. To retreat would mean the end of her empire and likely Julian's death. To attack Davenport head-on with the information she had would be an act of desperation, one that could expose her entire operation. Evangeline was trapped, forced to play the final move in her human chess game. What matters more, saving her army or taking the king? There are no historical records of what happened next. What is known is this: 1 week later, the nation's largest newspaper published a devastating series of reports. Diaries, letters, and financial ledgers that not only exposed Davenport's financial crimes, but revealed his darkest perversions, details that so intimate they could have only come from someone who shared his bed. His career evaporated overnight. As for Julian, he was spotted months later, boarding a ship to Europe, safe and sound. And Madame Evangeline? Her tailor shop was found empty, abandoned as if it had never existed. She became what she had always been, a ghost. Her story leaves us with an unsettling question. How many other Madame Evangelines has history forgotten to record? How many wars were won, not on battlefields, but in the dark bedrooms of power by silent armies whose victories were never celebrated? History, indeed, is written by the victors, but perhaps the greatest victors of all are the ones who never